Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started at 7:30. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Thank you. All right, before Carl introduces tonight's program speaker, let's just review some of the Lyceum programs for the rest of the season. June 10th, next month, Vicky Keskinen, Mary Magdalene, follower of Jesus Christ, the first person Christ appeared to upon his resurrection. July, there's no Lyceum. August, there's no Lyceum. Wednesday, I think the date has changed from September 9th to now it's a week later, September 16th. So September 16th at 7:30, Andrea Guidoboni will present Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. The Modern Prometheus is an 1818 Gothic novel written by English author Mary Shelley. It tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a young scientist. You know the whole story, and she's going to tell you even more about it. Wednesday, October 14th, 2026, Paula Gregory. I don't have these memorized, so I have to turn the page. You'll have to bear with me. So this is the Harvard University Ware collection of Blaschka glass from 1890 to 1940. Leopold and Adolf Blaschka of Austerlitz, Germany, created 850 life-size glass models and 300 enlargement models representing 780 plant species. This really sounds quite interesting. So that is in October, and on November, Carol will be back to talk about food again. History is served. Culinary delights of the late 19th and early 20th century. And so this is going to really be focused on the advances in food preparation and storage and all that sort of thing. So that will be in November. And that will close out this season's programs. And now I'll turn this over to Carl, and he's going to introduce our guest speaker tonight.
I just wonder how many pieces of glass Paula will bring. I guess she'll bring 400 or 500 of them, right? All right, let me look this up here. It looks like it's on 2 pages too. So, all right, so tonight, presentation by Bryan Whittier, who we know very well. Thank you for being here again. And he'll be singing and dancing along with telling a story, as I understand. So take a journey to the life and accomplishments of fireside poet John Greenleaf Whittier through the eyes and music of one of his descendants. This course will cover everything from activity as an abolitionist to the great epic poems to his enduring legacy. The course is a lecture recital with in-depth discussion and presentation on the life, punctuated by all 3 of his poems in original renditions, I think it says here. So without further ado, Bryan Whittier, come on forward.
Howdy. Hello. I'm Bryan. Most of you know me. I am so happy that you've all come out to take a listen to what I have to say. Yeah, as he said, this is going to be a bit of a lecture recital kind of thing. So I'll be talking to you for about 45 minutes worth, and then the other 20 to 30 minutes of that will be my own original compositions that I will be performing for you. I will intersperse it throughout here, as you will see here. There's going to be, I'll talk a little bit about his life, I'll put in one of my songs, talk about his life a little bit more, put a little bit more song and dance in there, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it as you go along. Just as a note for this particular presentation, it is a little bit abridged from what my original version was. I've presented this twice before. The original is about an hour and a half, but I figured that at about 8:45 you guys are going to be hankering for some of that scrumptious stuff my mom made. So I will cut it down a little bit for you guys so that way we can get right to the yummy part. With that in mind, I'm sure that you all have the same question, which is, of course, why this guy? Why do you care? Why are we going to care about this guy whatsoever? The first, of course, is relation for me. I care because we share a last name. I am not actually a direct descendant. I lied to you. I apologize. He never married, never had kids, so we're seventh cousins, 3 times removed, approximately, give or take. So in other words, his great-grandfather is a direct descendant of mine. Because of this, it's led me to research his history a lot over the years, taking an interest in his work as a poet. The second reason, of course, though, is his actual importance to the canon of poetry. When you start to dig in on his work, his legacy that he's left behind is pretty plain. He, in the 30-year struggle to abolish slavery, he played an important part both as a poet and a politician, and even more so potentially as a moral force. He was among the most ardent of the pre-war reformers, and one of the things about it was that he was saved from the biggest problem that that group had, which was sort of a narrowing passion that got away from the rest of the issues that were at hand at that time. He was saved from that because he also insisted on tolerance and other qualities that had come to cherish throughout his study of his Quaker piety and ancestors. But if his life was dramatic for a moral, political, and sometimes physical conflict going on within it, his poetry is of at least equal significance. He was highly regarded as a poet during the second half of the 19th century, enshrined within the pantheon of fireside poets. So you might know names such as William Cullen Bryant, Ralph Waldo Emerson, James Russell Lowell, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and of course probably the most well-known, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the whole 3-name gang. They loved his poems at the time so much so that they'd be the type of writing that you find on your coffee table for guests. For that reason alone, I think it's a fascinating glimpse into what was important for the average middle-class family in the mid-1800s. So, to start off, pointing the thing in the right direction would be nice. His youth, indeed his whole life, was rooted in the values, history, and traditions of rural Essex County that he came from in Massachusetts. He was born December 17, 1807, near Haverhill, Massachusetts, in a farmhouse that his great-great-grandfather had built in the 17th century. He grew up in a very poor but respectable household characterized by hard work, Quaker piety, and warm family affection, which would make its way into his works in various places. He grew up on a farm in a household with his parents, brother, and 2 sisters, a maternal aunt, paternal uncle, and a constant flow of visitors and hired hands. It was discovered, of course, later that he was colorblind, and then when he was unable to see the difference between ripe and unripe strawberries. The farm was not very profitable, probably not for the strawberry reason, but there was only enough money to get by. He himself was not cut out for farm labor, despite his father's best wishes, and he suffered from bad health and physical frailty his whole life. Although he received very little formal education, he was an avid reader and studied his father's books on Quakerisms until they became the foundation of his ideology. He was heavily influenced by the doctrines of that religion, particularly its stress on humanitarianism, compassion, and social responsibility. I have a feeling most of you know largely about the Quakers, so I'm not going to go too in-depth on them, but what is important to his works is that they rejected elaborate religious ceremonies, liked to keep things simple, especially music, ironically enough, instead preferring meditative silence, the still, silent voice of God. They didn't have official clergy, believed in spiritual equity for men and women, and perhaps most importantly, they practiced pacifism and played a key role in both the abolitionist and women's rights movements. Shortly after his primary education, a teacher helped his discovery of Scottish poet Robert Burns, who could speak the beauty of commonplace circumstances of a rural environment. It made him wish to be a poet. He wrote a few poems, and his sister Mary sent in his first poem, The Deity, to the Newburyport Free Press, without his permission. And its editor, William Lloyd Garrison, who would become a longtime friend of his, published it on June 8, 1826, when he was 19 years old. It is virtually the same topic and message as another poem we'll talk about later, which I find very interesting that his very first poem is also probably one of the ones that you know the best. So, interesting parallel there. Garrison, as well as another local editor, encouraged him to attend the recently opened Haverhill Academy, which was closed in 1968. And to raise money to attend the school, he became a shoemaker for about 3 years, a deal being made to pay part of his tuition with food from the family farm. Before his second term, he earned money to cover the tuition by serving as a teacher in the one-room schoolhouse in what is now Merrimack, Massachusetts. And then he completed his high school education in just 2 terms. So, he started a career after that. He received his first substantial public praise from his work from critic John Neal via Neal's magazine, The Yankee, in 1828. He valued the opinion of this man more than any other established writer at the time, pledging that if he did not like his writing, he would, quote, quit poetry and everything else of the literary nature. In 1829, Neal told Whittier to persevere, and I am sure you will have your reward in every way. In 1829, he was 22, too frail to be of any help on the farm, too poor to have given himself more than that year at the academy, so instead he accepted the editorship of the American Manufacturer, a political weekly in Boston. The position had been secured to him by that same William Lloyd Garrison. He's going to be a very common thread throughout this. Garrison was a young newspaper editor who was just beginning his own long career as an abolitionist. Whittier entered the journalism for the opportunity to write. However, what he learned from the journalism was politics and polemics. His editorials, first in the American Manufacturer and later in Hartford, Connecticut, New England Review, were at least as fierce in their denunciation of Democrat Andrew Jackson as they were warm in support of the Whig Henry Clay. In February of 1831, while at Hartford, Whittier published a collection of tales and poems, his first, Legends of New England. Although the volume received very little attention at the time, it is significant for poets as pioneering an effort to render New England folklore, and in some respects I've read in multiple academic papers when doing this, it may be said to anticipate works like of those of Nathaniel Hawthorne. He was never really comfortable with this Gothic setting of his poems and suppressed the book and tried to get it removed from shelves later in his life. Apocryphally, on one occasion he paid $5, a quantitative sum at the time, for the privilege of destroying a copy of the book. This, of course, started a bit of a turning point for him. Toward the end of 1831, he retired in ill health back to Haverhill and spent the winter convalescing. He knew that he was at a crossroads in his life, and he wished to settle on a vocation. Poetry hardly paid at all, and he had come to like the politics that he found in his vociferous public support of Clay, and it had made him a popular man in Massachusetts. In 1832, he decided to try his hand at those politics, but after losing a congressional election at 25, he suffered a nervous breakdown and returned home, pondering further for another year and a half. The answer to this dilemma came about his vocation came in the mail on March 22nd, 1833, in a letter. His friend and patron Garrison, who had been publishing under The Liberator 2 years before, wrote to Whittier urging him to enlist in the gathering struggle against slavery. Your talents, zeal, and influence, it says in the letter, are all needed. Whittier knew that to enlist in this cause, unpopular as it was at the time in New England, would be tantamount to giving up all hope of ever gaining elected office. To form such an alliance would also exclude him from the literary circles he might want to be in, making publishing his poetry difficult, if not impossible. However, his Quaker origins had slowly brought him to the conclusion that Garrison now urged upon him, that the evil of slavery had to be resisted actively. With that, I would like to present, I keep on pointing toward the screen as if that's going to work. I went too far. I'd like to present to you my first composition here. These three compositions are part of a trio that I wrote throughout my time at UNH. It is one group under the label Twice Whittier. The first thing I'll note is that I wrote this one when I was at the very beginning of my career at UNH. You'll probably note that they'll get better as they go along. So I'll note that before I sing any of them, most composers get to choose and select lines that they think best suit their composition. I've done the same thing. This is not the full poem, but it is all the lyrics that I will be using. When I wrote the piece, I chose the stanzas that I thought best fit my vision for what the piece was. The poem itself, Flowers in Winter, is an 1855 poem written before the Civil War as both a vision of New England life and as a poem of hope for those under the oppression of slavery. It reveals a contrast between the frozen exterior and the blossoming warmth within, a duality that echoes both the cycle of nature and the experience of the incredible humanity that still existed despite the harshness of the lives that were lived by the slaves. While the poem shares the romantic embrace of New England nature found in Whittier's other works, it differs in its focus on the hope extant through the winter. It suggests that no matter the hardships, the season shall pass and spring shall come again. It stands as a testament, in my personal opinion, to the transformative power of hope, providing solace through the hardest of times and connecting humans to the beauty and resilience of the natural world and ourselves. I wrote this one in spring of 2018. It was my first major piece I wrote at UNH on my way to completing my bachelor's. I wrote this to be more ballad-like, as if it were like an aria from an opera. So I hope that you enjoy. I'm going to bring it up here. And hope it plays. How strange to greet this frosty morn in graceful counterfeit of flower. These children of the meadows born of sunshine and showers. How well the conscious wood retains the picture of its flowers on home, and lights and shades the purple stains, and golden hues of bloom. It was a happy thought to bring to the hard season's frost and rime this painted memory of spring, this dream of summertime. Our hearts are lighter for its sake, our fancy's age renews its youth, and dim remembered fictions take the guise of present truth. The ancient platter sprouted wild, the pipkin wore its old-time green, the cradle o'er the sleeping child became a leafy screen. But welcome and light. Without is neither cold nor green, within for birds the perch clouds sing. Yet summer-like we sit between the autumn and the spring. The one with bridal blush of rose and sweetest breath of woodland balm, and one whose matron lips unclose in smiles of saintly calm. And she, when spring comes round again, by greening slope and singing flood, shall wander seeking not in vain her darlings of the wood. All right. So, with that in mind, he responded to Garrison's letter in 1833 with a privately printed pamphlet called Justice and Expediency, or Slavery Considered with a View to its Rightful and Effectual Remedy, Abolition. A closely reasoned and carefully documented attack on the Colonization Society. Widely supported by northern and southern churches, the Colonization Society, which you probably haven't heard of, but if you have, whoa, you probably don't like them either. They were a conservative reform group that proposed to resolve the issue of slavery by sending American blacks, both slave and free, back to Africa. Yikes. This society was, at the time of Whittier's pamphlet, headed by Henry Clay, the Whig that he supported. An abolitionist group in New York republished this work and distributed hundreds of copies, which destroyed all of his political hopes, and his demand for immediate emancipation alienated both the northern businessmen and the southern slaveholders. But it did seal his commitment to a cause that he deemed morally correct and socially necessary. On the basis of this pamphlet and as a friend of Garrison's, Whittier was chosen to be the delegate for the Philadelphia Convention that December, that December in 1833, and founded the American Anti-Slavery Society. Accepting this position was an important moment in his life, and though his identification with the movement entailed many sacrifices throughout his career, he says he never regretted this decision. He was quoted as saying, "I set a higher value on my name as appended to the Anti-Slavery Declaration of 1833 than on the title page of any book I've ever written." He said that it was the most significant action of his life from his consideration. His political skill made him useful as a lobbyist, and his willingness to badger anti-slavery congressional leaders into joining the abolitionist cause was invaluable. From 1835 to 1838, he traveled widely in the North, attending conventions, securing votes, speaking to the public, and lobbying politicians. As he did so, he received his fair share of violent responses, being several times mobbed, stoned, and run out of town. He could no longer hope to fulfill his dream of winning a prominent political office, but in 1835 he was able to gain a seat in the state legislature for his small home district of Haverhill. In that, he was an effective spokesman for his cause, winning over many to his views on the slavery question, sending petitions to Congress, trying to get a bill through the State House granting trial by jury in cases involving the return of runaway slaves, and even organizing opposition to the death penalty. He served only one term, having again jeopardized his always precarious health by his hard work. He continued, meanwhile, to express his abolitionism in his poems, published in Garrison's The Liberator and the columns of the Essex Gazette, which he was now editor for. But opposition to that moral stand was mounting. He was forced out of the Essex Gazette for failing to toe the orthodox Whig line, and was threatened with violence in September 1835 by a mob in Concord, New Hampshire. In 1836, he sold his 148-acre family farm, moved with his mother and sister a few miles away to Amesbury in order that they might be closer to his Quaker friends' meeting house. He was, however, frequently away. In 1837, he was in the New York office of the Anti-Slavery Society directing a nationwide petition campaign, and in the following year, he moved to Philadelphia to edit the Pennsylvania Freeman, which he succeeded in turning into a vigorous organ of the abolitionist movement. During this period, he was in close contact with all the most prominent anti-slavery leaders in America, from Garrison and the Grimke sisters to Lydia Maria Child and John Quincy Adams. Poems written during the progress of the abolition question in the United States between the years 1830 and 1838, the long-titled first collection of Whittier's political poetry, was brought out in 1837 without his knowledge by some of his anti-slavery advocates and associates in Boston. In 1838, he authorized an expanded and corrected edition called Poems, which was published in Philadelphia. In some of these poems, he contrasted the apparent commitment of the United States to slavery with its historic dedication to freedom. The poems were meant to be, and indeed were, effective propaganda. Unfortunately, perhaps too effective. During the late 1830s, a split developed within the rank of the abolitionists. Some, such as Whittier, preferred to work through the political system for change and hoped to preserve the Union. Others, such as Garrison, were less concerned with the Union and believed that slavery could not be abolished without also destroying the U.S. Constitution. While Garrison worked with the extreme non-resistance, placed his reliance on the moral persuasion, Whittier was busy helping to organize a brand new party, the Liberty Party. He knew that success required legislative change, not merely moral persuasion. This opinion alone engendered a very bitter split from Garrison, and they barely spoke for the rest of their lives. It also marked a split from his active role in politics as well. The publication in 1843 of Whittier's Lays of My Home and Other Poems marked his return to the poetic treatment of regional materials. Included in this collection are poems such as The Merrimack, treating the local scenery with the touch of the pastoral landscape artist, poems such as The Ballad of Cassandra Southwick, exploring New England history, and poems such as The Funeral Tree of Secaucus, based on Native American lore. The near relation of Whittier's regional and abolitionist poetry is indicated not only in the consistent advocacy of tolerance and brotherhood in the regional poems, but also in the appeal to New England pride that so often forms the basis of his anti-slavery discourse. With the abolitionist movement at arm's length, he was able, during the next 2 decades, to maintain a healthier and more mature balance between his twin commitments to poetry and reform. Okay. Around then, the stresses of his editorial duties, worsening health, and the dangerous mob violence caused him to have a bit of a physical breakdown. He retired to Amesbury in 1840 and remained there for the rest of his life, ending his active participation in abolitionism, but continuing to work actively for the Liberty Party candidates and for the election of others, regardless of party, who favored emancipation. Even so, he continued to believe that the best way to gain abolitionist support was to broaden the Liberty Party's political appeal, and he persisted in advocating for the addition of other issues to the platform. He eventually participated in the evolution of the Liberty Party into the Free Soil Party, which I'm sure you've heard of. Probably not. And some say his greatest political feat was convincing Charles Sumner, who was perhaps the most outspoken abolitionist in Washington, to run on the Free Soil ticket and win in the U.S. Senate in 1850. In 1846, he published his last collection of anti-slavery poems, Voices of Freedom, and in 1847 brought out a collection of prose sketches titled Supernaturalism of New England. In the same year, he became a contributing editor with the National Era, a Washington-based anti-slavery journal that, until the founding of the Atlantic Monthly, 10 years later, served as his main publishing outlet. It featured the best of his writing for those 10 years, and that included both his prose and his poetry. Being confined to his home and away from the action offered him a chance to write a better poetry in general, including his abolitionism poetry, and he was even poet laureate, considered for his party. Whittier's poem often used slavery to represent all kinds of oppression, from physical to spiritual to economic forms of oppression. And his poems stirred up popular responses because they appealed to people's feelings rather than to logic. The most significant of Whittier's works to appear during this national era was Leaves from Margaret Smith's Journal in the province of Massachusetts Bay, 1678-9. It was published as a book in 1849. It is his only novel. It was cast in the form of letters and a diary of a 17th century New England Quaker, Margaret Smith. The pacifism here did not prevent him from being an ardent supporter of the Union cause when the Civil War broke out. He admired President Abraham Lincoln very much and was particularly proud of having voted for him 4 times. Twice as a citizen and twice as one of the electors in 1860 and 1864. That being said, the poetry of this following period shows his increasing disengagement from broadly political issues. His attention was turning more and more to his own political past, as shown in various nostalgic, quasi-autobiographical poems. He was also increasingly drawn to the larger but still personal past of New England history, as shown in the many fine ballads that he wrote at this time, including the Prophecy of Samuel Sewall. All of these poems were first collected in Home Ballads and Poems, published in 1860. There's almost no hint of the impending Civil War included in this volume. With that, the Civil War is here, so I'll sing you a song. My Triumph was a poem that was written in 1870. It was a reflection on life, the self, and the future. The speaker begins by describing the changing seasons, which symbolize the passage of time and the inevitability of death for themselves. The speaker then acknowledges the limitations of what has been accomplished, but also expresses trust in the future, both for his own legacy and his humanity on the whole. The poem ends with a sense of optimism and hope as the speaker envisions a better world in the future, one where love, equity, and beauty prevail, despite him not being able to accomplish this himself. Overall, in my opinion, the poem is moving and inspiring as a meditation on the human experience. It's a reminder that even in the face of death and uncertainty, there is always hope for a better future, both for ourselves and for the world around us. In the success of those that come after us, we are triumphing ourselves. I wrote this piece as more of a folk reading, sort of an operatic recit, so it starts still in my old aria phase, and as it goes along, I become more speaking to you as if I were speaking to you, as I'm doing right now. I tried to encapsulate both the feeling of being prepared for death because of my satisfaction of my own legacy. So, the autumn time has come on woods that dream of bloom, and over purpling vines the low sun fainter shines, yet failed to act. Others shall sing the song, others shall right the wrong, finish what I begin, and all I fail of win. What matter I or they, mine or another's day? Hail to the coming singers, hail to the brave light bringers. The airs of heaven blow o'er me, a glory shines before me of what mankind shall be, pure, generous, kind, and free. Ring bells in unreared steeples, the joy of unborn peoples. Sound trumpets far off blown, your triumph is my own. I feel the earth move sunward. I join the great march onward. A heart adorned with pride shall leave me satisfied. I'm too tense. Need a drink. All right. Awesome. All right. So with that, Civil War is here. Whittier wrote many patriotic poems during the war. In Wartime and Other Poems, published in 1864, included several fine examples of Whittier's public poetry. Thy Will Be Done and Ein Feste Burg are some among those that you might notice and understand and have known about before. This is the period from which many of his poems were set to song, especially to hymns. In this collection, Whittier joyously recorded the death knell of slavery, the moment for which, quote, so much of his career had been in preparation for. With the Civil War over and the 13th Amendment to the Constitution ratified, a part of Whittier's public life came to a close, just as a year earlier, a part of his personal life had come to a close with the death of his beloved younger sister, Elizabeth. His personal grief, combined with the larger national grief of the Civil War, furthered his literary maturity. Whittier's whole mood was retrospective and memorial as he set to work on the Yankee pastoral that he had promised the Atlantic Monthly editor James Russell Lowell he would write. The result was Snowbound, his masterpiece and the piece that you probably are most acquainted with. The poem recalls a winter storm at the old Whittier homestead when the poet was a child. A day and night of driving snow had transformed everything. We looked upon a world unknown, of nothing we could call our own. Around the glistening wonder bent the blue walls of the firmament. No cloud above, no earth below. A universe of sky and snow. The threat of isolation, of freezing or starving, is countered by the family at the wood fire on the hearth, the warmth of which is a symbol of life and family affection. Shut in from all the world without, we sat the clean-winged hearth about, content to let the north wind roar in baffled rage at pane and door, while red logs before us beat, the frost line back with tropic heat. The physical and spiritual sufficiency of this besieged family circle is the subject of Whittier's reminiscence precisely because most of those who were then present were now dead. By recalling each of them in turn within the poem, Whittier substitutes the light of affectionate memory for the light of the burning oaken log by which that night they gathered together. The effect is to make the poem itself stand witness to the everlasting light of love and the connection that he has with others. Snowbound has lost none of its appeal with the passing of time. A large part of its charm is in its presentation of what Whittier called Flemish pictures of olden days, composed of the common detail of rural life in early 19th century New England. The few books, the schoolmaster boarding with the family, the sounds to be heard on the windy winter nights, the importance of newspapers in gaining a sense of the larger world outside, and especially the companionship with the harsh nature. In 1866, the kind of life that Snowbound describes was as surely departed, in fact, as it was present to the mellowed childhood memory of thousands of readers. For many at the time, the nostalgia was palpable in the words that he wrote, in the words that he wrote, much the way that the writings of the 50s and 60s are nostalgic today. The poem was Whittier's first genuine commercial success, as well as his most complete artistic success. He realized $10,000 from the sale of the first edition, and never wanted for money again. Adjusting for inflation, that's about $250,000 approximately in today's money. It doesn't really work when you go that far back, but $250,000 was significant enough for him to not want anything else for the rest of his life. The remainder of the poet's long life was spent quietly in Amesbury and, after 1876, in a spacious home in Danvers, Massachusetts, called Oak Knoll, which he left only for his regular summer excursions into the lake and mountain region of New Hampshire. He continued to write almost up to the time of his death. Whittier's last book of poems, At Sundown, was privately printed in 1890 for close friends and was republished for the public with additions at about the time of the poet's death, which was September 7th, 1892. The last poem that Whittier wrote was a tribute to his friend Oliver Wendell Holmes on the occasion of Holmes's 83rd birthday, about how they had outlived the rest of their generation. Heavy. That's quite a legacy to leave and interesting to go through. Officially, as you can see written here, he wrote 20 collections of poetry, both propaganda and household poetry, 5 prose publications along with countless journal articles for his various publications as editor, 1 novel, and individual poems from other sources numbering in the hundreds. We'll start with some of the more shallow pieces of legacy that he has. His reputation was never higher or more apparently secure than at the time of his death. For years, his birthdays had been virtually public holidays and were marked by celebrations throughout New England and the West. His family farm, known as the John Greenleaf Whittier Homestead, or simply Whittier's birthplace, is now a historic site open to the public where I performed this very presentation. His later residence in Amesbury, where he lived for 56 years, is also open to the public, known as the John Greenleaf Whittier Home. His hometown of Haverhill, of course, has many named buildings and landmarks in his honor. The city of Whittier, California is named after the poet, as are the communities of Whittier, Alaska, Whittier, Iowa, and Greenleaf, Idaho. Whittier College and Whittier Law School are both named after him. Whittier's mascot, the poets. The SS Whittier Victory is a World War II ship named after Whittier College and therefore named after Whittier. Whittier Peak and Mount Whittier in Washington, and also Mount Whittier in New Hampshire are mountains named after him. I did check, there are 0 trails. Not a single one. Which we can change, all of us. There's an alternate history story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, who's a name that you almost certainly know. It's called Pease Correspondence. I've never known anybody who's known anything about it, but it is considered one of the first alternate history stories ever. It was written in 1846. Includes the note somewhere early in the book that Whittier, a fiery Quaker youth to whom the muse had perversely assigned a battle trumpet, got himself lynched in South Carolina. Encyclopedia Britannica Films made a 15-minute documentary about him in 1950 about his life and accomplishments as part of a series of short movies on important literary and historical figures. It wasn't really entirely accurate to real life. It shifts some parts around to make a cohesive narrative instead of aiming for realism and accuracy. So I didn't like it. And most importantly, of course, is his poetry. Highly regarded in his lifetime and for a period thereafter, he's now largely remembered for his anti-slavery writings and his more popular poems like Barbara Frietchie, The Barefoot Boy, The Pumpkin, Maud Miller, and of course, Snowbound. At the time, Whittier was essentially a public poet, somewhat of a rock star of the period. A poet speaking to a large segment of the American people, including many who were not otherwise readers of poetry or anything else. They often came to his work to bask in the moral tone, to attend to the heroic or prophetic voice in his poems, or to receive comfort from his characteristic optimism. The popularity he enjoyed among his contemporaries seems to be largely based on poems that modern readers have rejected a bit as more sentimental, a reaction against this kind of soft-focused vision of the world that Whittier has often invoked, set in the early years of the 20th century when there was a new, more stringent style of poetry being established. In part, it was overturning the Victorian canons of taste that had elevated the work of Whittier's generation, but I think I might be getting a little too far into the weeds with that one. Critics today are largely looking at his pieces in a more sentimental and local color tradition, especially through the lens of his female contemporaries. He emerges more in a fresh light when you look at his anti-slavery poems, such as A Sabbath Scene, when you see that they're very conscious of gender issues because of his Quaker beliefs, showing an aesthetic rather similar to stuff like Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. His Quaker-derived acknowledgement of female equality surely formed a basis for his many friendship with other women authors of the period, such as Celia Thaxter, Rose Terry Cook, Lucy Larcom, Gail Hamilton, Anne Fields, Ina Coolberth, and of course, Sarah Orne Jewett. The personal and professional admiration that all these authors expressed for Whittier and his poetry suggests that they may not, after all, have been working in dissimilar ways. He was especially influential on the prose writings of Jewett, who he shared a belief in the moral quality of literature and an interest in New England folklore with. Jewett dedicated one of her books to him, and modeled several of her characters after people in Whittier's life. In the end, the Poetry Foundation says this about Whittier and his poetry. John Greenleaf Whittier is an interesting poet for several reasons. He can be seen as an example of the kind of poet 19th century America considered important. His works were often dogmatic, trite, moralistic, and even excessive. But in his use of the native materials such as New England history, legend, and landscape, Whittier made poetry accessible to the general reading public. He was never obscure, and he thus served as the poetic spokesman of his age. His work was a kind of cultural mirror that reflected the conventional middle-class attitudes of the period. With that, let's talk a little bit about the song. I've cut a little bit here because this was the longest part of the thing, and you guys want food. So, I think you guys are probably most interested in the hymns, because there are a few of them that show up at the bottom of the hymnal in our pilgrim hymnal that we have here at our church. The first thing I'll note, though, is that as a Quaker, and I mentioned this briefly before, he was deeply opposed to music in churches at all. He didn't like church music. Traditionally, Quakers have not sung in worship, but valued silence, waiting for the still small voice of God. His religious background made him refuse anyone setting his poems to song until shortly before he passed. Makes you wonder what he might think of my pieces. Ironically though, as you can see by the numbers up there, if you can read them, that hasn't stopped people. People still have taken many of his pieces and put them to song. I checked several hymn collections, found the most complete was hymnary.com with 190 unique entries for John Greenleaf Whittier in 11 different languages. I was surprised to see instances of Tamil, Hawaiian, Tagalog, Esperanto, and native North Dakota on that list of languages. Many of these are quite popular, but the standout winner for the most likely that you've heard, and the one that I think warrants the most attention here, and I kept in, is Dear Lord and Savior of Dear Lord and Father of Mankind, rather. This is a hymn with words taken from a longer poem, The Brewing of Soma. It is an incredible irony because in the poem itself is a rebuke of evangelical worship practices, like the excessive singing that happens in hilarious. In an unidentified letter about this poem, Whittier wrote, "Quakerism has run into Methodism, and the Quaker singing is dolefully bad. I am too old-fashioned to bear it with any patience, but I suppose the singers mean well, and perhaps like the speakers of unknown tongues in Paul's day, they can edify themselves." Anyway, it's amazing that we have taken this polemic against historic forms of Christian worship and turned it into a standard hymn, popular particularly in Anglican churches. There are two versions of the song. There is an aria that is written for an oratorio Judith with the tune Repton that was adapted posthumously in 1924 by the music director of the Repton School to 5 verses of a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier. Repton has a sweeping melody, wide range marked by interval leaps of fourths and fifths. This is probably not the one that you guys have heard. This is the version that is played, like if you talk about Dear Lord and Father of Mankind over in all of Europe, they will be singing this version. I'll play that for you here. They will not know the one that we have in ours. Likely, none of you have heard that unless you've specifically gone out of your way for it, and definitely not heard it in an actual church. The one that you guys know is a tune called Rest. It was a Victorian tune by Frederick C. Maker in sometime in the 1840s. He actually composed for American poet W.B. Tappan, who was doing it for a completely different setting. There is an hour of peaceful rest, which you'll note has the same, it'll fit lyrically. Don't worry about it. In this tune, Maker sets the first 2 lines of this in a relatively low range and has it go gently up and then back down, which I think personally, if John Greenleaf Whittier was here, would like that better, because it's much more laid down to the symbolism of peace, calm, and silence that he would have much more preferred with the Quaker religious philosophy. I'm sure that many of you have heard this one, but just in case, I will play a little bit of it here. Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. Reclothe us in our rightful mind, in purer lives thy service find. Briefly before I move on from this, The first five, this only includes 5 verses of the original 17. A little long-winded at times. The first 11 of those concern themselves with drinking a ritual drink called soma, which is described in sacred Vedic texts. It's a psychoactive, supposedly, I haven't tasted it. It's a psychoactive drug, which the liquid described by proponents as healing and giving strength and immortality, and it's an elixir of life. But the poet's observation were consistent with his time, that it's not a brewed intoxicant, but just an extract from the stock of the plant, and the people were just being crazy for no reason. And so they're a bit of a rant, and so nobody actually talks about them, but then if you take that out, and then the next part is a purer metaphor that is distilled down to, instead of that, have your life be an outpouring of generosity and quietness and meditation, bringing someone with quiet contemplation closer to God, instead of frenzied exultations and proclamations of faith. The final verse of this, and I'll leave it after this, is, behold, it is from 1 Kings 19:11 through 12, when Elijah, itself a conflation of 2 Judaic theonyms, enters the wilderness in a personal quest to affirm his faith. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after a fire, a still small voice. And of course, that was then made into the last verse of the poem, of this hymn. Breathe through the heats of our desire, thy coolest and thy balm. Let sense be dumb, let flesh retire. Speak through the earthquake, wind and fire. O still small voice of calm. On a completely separate note, there is a very good chance that the R&B disco group Earth, Wind and Fire got their name from the same bit of text. Doesn't have anything to do with Whittier, but it's fun, so I put it in. I'm going to go quickly through this next bit, and I'm not going to play a lot of these, but there is a lot of other places where Whittier's texts are put to song, especially in the 20th century. Charles Ives did a fascinating text to post-romantic song placement. Follows a lot of modernist teachings of the time. It includes, he does a lot of stuff with, if you don't know anything about Charles Ives, he does a lot of stuff with polytonality, polyrhythm, tone clusters, aleatory, and quarter tones. If you know what those mean, then great. If you don't know what they mean, then, quote, it's music that sounds freaky. It's very freaky sounding. I'll play it after while we go to have some food. So it is very interesting, and it was set in 1919 under one of his 114 songs, in which this is number 42. Very interesting setting, completely different from everything else on this list. Another person put Flowers in Winter to a choir setting. I think it's particularly good. In fact, I think that they did a better job of writing a beautiful piece of music, whereas I think I did a better job at the text. They did a better job at writing a good piece of music. So I'll let you be the judge of that. I'll play a little bit of that one here.
Is this the one we sang?
Probably. There's only one of them. So.
Which one is that?
This is Flowers in Winter. It's the same text that I used. Going through these next ones, the Ballad of the Green Mountain Boys is a really interesting one. It describes a period when Vermont was deflecting from the land claims of the British colonies for New Hampshire and New York, trying to become its own state. He originally wrote the poem in 1828, but it was published anonymously. Similarities in the last stanza of it were pointed to with the prose of Ethan Allen, and because it was anonymous, people believed it was an actual, honest-to-goodness Ethan Allen piece. For nearly 60 years, the poem was republished with credit going to Ethan Allen. And even the co-founder of the Vermont Historical Society continued this confusion. Eventually, it was presented to, it was republished anonymously in England by the Northern Star in an issue which included 2 other poems by Whittier. How it got back into Whittier's publications, not really sure. He had never acknowledged his authorship, and in an obscure Massachusetts magazine, he was asked to confirm his authorship, and he acknowledged it as a boy's practical joke. He says this about this text: "The Song of the Vermonters was a piece of boyish mystification written 60 years ago and printed anonymously. The only person who knew of its authorship was my old friend Joseph T. Buckingham, and I suppose the secret was supposed to die with him. We were both amused to find it regarded by antiquarian authorities as a genuine relic of the old times. How the secret was discovered a few years ago, I have never known. I have never intentionally written anything in favor of war, but a great deal against it, I promise." I'll play that one after as well. There's also the first ever album of music from the Civil War included a piece that was written to the tune of Auld Lang Syne for the Song of the Kansas Emigrant. People who were emigrating to Kansas at the time were singing Auld Lang Syne, and they just put this to text. There's nothing really much more about it, but it sounds really nice. And then perhaps my favorite of these is that during his student years, Holst was particularly fascinated by Wagner's narrative writing and operatic treatment of Norse mythology. The influence is perceived in his Winter Idyll. Now, Holst and Whittier were fairly good. They weren't like friends, but they knew each other pretty well as acquaintances through their various circles in both the political and through the artistic parts of their lives. And A Winter Idyll is not specifically named Snowbound, but Snowbound's subtitle is Snowbound, A Winter Idyll. It is very clearly based on not the North mythology, but instead the New England mythology. A Winter Idyll opens with a motif that has eighth notes reminiscent of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, followed by a melody in the oboe which expands to the full opera. It's nostalgic in as much its orchestration seems to combine Wagner, Mendelssohn, and Beethoven, heralding Holst's musical success in combining romantic styles, folk melodies, and the collective imaginations, all characteristics of his usual output. I cut this one, but I'll mention it briefly. He also wrote like several other like tone poems for voice that like nobody's ever recorded. Like you can find the manuscripts for it, and like they're completely untouched, that are all set to words of Whittier's, which is really cool. I've taken a look at them, and I think I want to make official recordings of them someday. It would be really cool stuff. Anyway, so I'll play that one as well as you guys are headed out. But what I'll do for you now is I will finish up with the third, and I think perhaps the best of my 3 songs. In School Days was written in 1869. It is still one of the best known poems in the American canon of literature. He wrote in School Days for Our Young Folks, which is a tribune. He had been asked to write some verses to go along with the pictures the editors had sent him, but he didn't have time, and so he sent In School Days, which he had been working on already, instead. Its immediate popularity was due in part to the number of readers who still had memories of attending these one-room schoolhouses. Compared to the other poems I've set, this one is much more narrative-driven. In fact, if you haven't already spoiled yourself on the ending, don't. Just look at me. There's a twist ending, and I tried to write it into my song very potently. It's much more narrative driven, and so I set it in its entirety. This is the entire poem, which is funny because this is one of the shorter ones of his poems. If Flowers in Winter is a recognition of our own striving for success and becoming a better society, and my triumph is an acknowledgement of that success being futile and the real legacy being in those who come after us, for me, In School Days transcends to an appreciation that success in life and legacy after death are both hollow if the life you lived wasn't worth living in the first place. The connections you have with those around you and the people you love are worth more than any legacy could give. When I wrote this piece, I was just finishing my bachelor's at UNH, and I feel that through the three pieces, I had grown much like the poet had through these three pieces. Take a specific listen to the modal mixture, if you know what that means, or where, if you don't, where things feel a little off. I wanted the piece to feel more like narrative, as Whittier had intended, and I hope that comes through in my performance. I'm going to be telling you a story. Still sits the schoolhouse by the road, a ragged beggar sleeping. Around it still the sumacs grow, and blackberry vines are creeping. Within the master's desk is seen, deep scarred by raps official, the warping floor, the battered seats, the jackknife's carved initial. The charcoal frescoes on its wall, its doors worn still betraying the feet that creeping slow to school went storming, storming out to play. Long years ago, a winter sun shone over it at setting. Lit up its western window panes and low eaves icy fretting. The tangled golden curls and brown eyes full of grieving. of one who still her step delayed when all the school were leaving. For near her stood the little boy, her childish favor singled. His wrap rolled low upon a face where pride and shame were mingled. Pushing with restless feet the snow, to right and left he lingered, as restlessly her tiny hands the blue-checked apron fingered. He saw her lift her eyes, he felt the soft hands light caressing, and heard the tremble of her voice as if a fault confessing. I'm sorry that I spelt the word, I hate to go above you, because the brown eyes lower fell, because you see I love you. Still memory to a gray-haired man, that sweet child face is showing. Dear girl, the grasses on her grave have 40 years been growing. He lives to learn in life's hard school how few who pass above him lament their triumph and his loss, like her, because they love him. Thank you very much. That is pretty much it for me today. I am so glad that you guys came out to see what I had to offer. I hope you enjoyed. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
So he lived to about 85 years of age, is that right?
About that, yeah. I believe it was 85. He was an old man for that time period. It was not frequent that you saw people living
It
to
just
that
seems
point.
amazing because you kept repeating how sickly he was.
Exactly.
You were kind of thinking he was going to meet again.
Yeah, no, it was sort of a surprise to a lot of historians that despite he was very frail, he was he always was described as looking gaunt. So despite all that, he lived a long and prosperous life. Didn't really do much there at the end, but I mean, it was still surprising nonetheless.
What was the problem between Garrison and him? How did they split?
So the big split between the two of them was that, in simple terms, I would say Garrison wanted to completely redo the Constitution. He thought that the best way to fix slavery was to throw it all away and start again. And Whittier believed that it was possible and perhaps the best way to make slavery go away through legislative change. That we can fix this, and we're going to do so by doing it better ourselves in the current system. And so the two of them butted heads in a very heated moment. It was apparently one large argument, and they barely talked for the rest of their lives. Sure.
So it wasn't just a split between Whittier and Garrison. It was a split in the entire anti-slavery movement.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like you said, Garrison wanted to tear up the Constitution, tear up the United States of America, have it cease to exist. Well, so many people in the anti-slavery movement just couldn't accept that anti-American sentiment.
Yeah.
And so they split with Garrison, and the whole anti-slavery movement split.
Not only that, but part of that split itself was precipitated by Whittier himself, because he was writing this poetry that was going counter to what Garrison and his other people were talking about at these conventions for abolitionist, for the abolitionist movement. So what they were hearing in, these sorts of talks and, conventions was going against what was being written, and a lot of people were siding with both. Both things had their own supporters. The whole thing split for this reason, and it kind of was partially the fault of Whittier. Now, in the end, of course, we fixed it via a civil war, which was kind of rough, but also eventually by legislative change. So, in reality, Whittier's side was somewhat on the correct side of history there. But, I'll let you pull up your own ideas and how you feel about it. In general, though, the fact that it was split was partially Whittier's fault. It was, he engendered that split with his poetry.
Frederick Douglass, the former slave who became so pronounced and so much as outspoken about slavery in America. Sure. He split with Garrison for that very issue.
Yeah, actually, Frederick Douglass and Whittier did meet on a couple of occasions when he was down in Philadelphia as part of his, when he was going around and basically Whittier on tour around those various areas. I don't think he ever got to DC, but he did Philadelphia, and he did parts of his thing in New York, around the Boston area, etc. As he went down that sort of corridor, he did meet with Frederick Douglass and a couple other people that are major parts of the abolitionist movement on several occasions. I didn't have anything on what they talked about, but it's cool they met. Actually, speaking of, I know that he once met and wrote poetry for Humphrey Moore. That was another connection, because he was up around this area, and he had a one time that he went into this area of New Hampshire around the time that he was in the Concord area when he was getting stoned and thrown out of town. He was in this area, and he didn't necessarily write poems for him, but he did meet with Humphrey Moore.
Yeah, Whittier and Moore shared something else as well. They were both free soil candidates for the House of Representatives, and both of them lost.
Yeah. Free Soil Party was it's tough because they were already, the previous party, the Liberty Party, was basically just an anti-segregation or an anti-slavery party. That was it. That's all they had, which is good, don't get me wrong, but also it's kind of one note, and that's why they switched it to the Free Soil Party. So even though that's the case, the Free Soil Party still didn't have a whole lot to run on. There's a reason why nobody's running Free Soil Party these days. Really the only person of any note that won on the Free Soil ticket was Sumner, like I mentioned earlier, he did a really good job when he was there, yeah, both of them were in this Free Soil Party and probably were connected through the party affiliation there. They would have had communication through that as well. Yeah. Go ahead.
So a couple things. Did you major in English and music? And was this like a senior thesis?
So I am a music composition major,
Okay.
or I was. I graduated with a bachelor's and then a master's in music composition in 2022. This was not part of any of my thesis stuff. I had a couple of very large theses for each of those that I could certainly tell you all about if you'd like, but you guys are hungry. So that being said, this was, I was in a musicology class where we were supposed to be talking about various, how musicology affects us in different cultures and different experiences. And I learned a lot of great stuff in there. The stuff about Javanese music, crazy. Totally recommend that stuff. Gamelan music, bonkers. But as part of that, we had to talk a little bit about a culture that you knew about. And so I had already done a project on music of Irish music and traditional music of that sort of sense. And so I moved on to the folklore of New England and the music that has come through that, and that brought me to this. I eventually took that and wove in my knowledge of John Greenleaf Whittier and my pieces themselves into one single cohesive work here for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute that I currently work for at UNH. I'm their enrollment coordinator. So I presented for them, and I also, like I mentioned earlier, I presented this at the Whittier birthplace down in Haverhill, which was really cool. I'm also presenting another thing with them that I'm sure will definitely not be a Lyceum next year for Rafe Vaughan Williams and his life and the Songs of Travel. So stay tuned. Go ahead.
So thank you. That's very interesting.
Sure.
Just your own story.
Yeah.
So I'm putting myself on a limb here because I could be like, but was the last poem with your beautiful song accompanying music,
Sure.
was that about a spelling bee gone wrong?
It was.
Okay.
Yes, it's hard to tell that.
I'm like, am I imagining?
It is, I almost, each time that I do that, I'm like, should I mention this beforehand? Because it's not going to be, yes, I'm sorry that I spelled the word, I won and you didn't,
Right.
but I love you, and so I should have done poorly so that you could have done better. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's basically what she's saying, and it's very cute, and then she dies, so it's sad.
It's funny how just a few words can tell that. whole
Yeah,
story.
yeah, it's very interesting that that's like the one line of it, but from that you get so much world building.
Yes.
But,
Thank
So I know we could probably keep going on, so go ahead, Kim.
Hopefully it will be quick, but it's a two-part. One, do you have a favorite?
the third one's definitely my favorite.
Of all of them, okay.
Yeah, although there are other poems that I really like. The Pumpkin's cute, Barefoot Boy is cute. It's very, very playful, but yes.
And part two, what surprised you the most when you were doing research about him?
I think how much he had a lot of trouble and being like doing things that he wanted to do. He was frail, so he couldn't make money. He was, his friends were constantly going against him, and that was what caused him to split in the abolitionist movement, and he had to go off on his own and do his own thing. His poetry was not particularly, at the early part of his career, it wasn't making a whole lot of money, but he wanted to make poems, and so he did so anyway. A lot of these things showed a sort of perseverance to me that I wouldn't have expected. And in general, it felt a lot like he was like a real dude. Like I could bring him up here today, and I feel like I could, after I got, past him not liking the fact that I'm putting his songs to music, I could have a conversation with him, and I feel like he felt very real to me, like a real person that, he had siblings that he interacted with often, and his sister just like, haha, I'm taking your poem and I'm submitting it for you, and now you're gonna be famous. Like, it felt so like a realistic narrative that I was able to spin here, and a realistic person that I don't tend to get with a lot of historical people. Like, you see backgrounds on a lot of historical figures, and it's like, yes, he was like, Beethoven, or, Cleopatra. These are all people who like are monoliths of stone, and it feels like he's just a flesh and blood guy. And I feel like that was very surprising when I was like looking him up and being like, yeah, I'm related to this guy. It's really cool. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you for having me.
So I think we found that the John Whittier and Bryan Whittier have more in common than we first thought tonight, right? So we look forward to more Whittier in the future. Right?
Yes. Autobiography, and then
Thank you.
a lot of food for like twice as many people than they have here.
Which is based on 1800s Whittier era food. So it's pretty basic.